The signature on the document was undeniably mine, bold, confident, the looping O of Olivia. Beside it was Jake's, a slightly less formed scribble, fitting for the man he was when he signed it. The prenuptial agreement. 6 years ago, it felt like a formality, a practical measure between two people building a life, acknowledging my established career and the assets I'd accumulated before meeting him. Now, that same document was the battleground for the ugliest conflict of my life. At 32, I was facing a divorce initiated by me, and the man I had loved was trying to dismantle my financial future, claiming I owed him for his lost youth. I met Jake when I was 25, already several years into building my career in tech. He was 21, fresh out of college, bright-eyed and full of potential, but still navigating the uncertainty of early adulthood. There was an undeniable spark. His energy was infectious, his optimism a refreshing counterpoint to my more grounded, sometimes cynical view of the world. I felt a pull towards him, a desire to share my life and my stability. Looking back, maybe there was an element of wanting to nurture that potential, to be part of his journey. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel less alone in my ambition. We dated for a year, a period filled with firsts for him and a comfortable maturity for me. Marriage felt like a natural progression, a merging of our lives. My parents, ever pragmatic, insisted on a prenup given my already significant savings, investments, and the down payment I'd made on my condo years before meeting Jake. It was all laid out transparently. Jake hired his own lawyer, a young but seemingly competent man named Mr. Harrison. They reviewed every clause. The agreement was clear. What was mine before marriage remained mine, and assets acquired during the marriage using my separate funds or income were also protected. Marital property would primarily be limited to truly joint accounts or jointly acquired significant assets, which honestly were few, as I handled most major purchases and investments. Jake signed it. He seemed to understand it. He agreed it was fair. The first few years of marriage were good. He found a job, nothing high-flying, but steady. I continued to climb the corporate ladder. I covered the lion's share of the expenses. The mortgage, renovations we did on the condo, vacations, investments. Jake contributed his salary to a joint account we used for groceries and household bills, and he handled more of the domestic responsibilities, which I appreciated. It felt like a team, contributing in different ways. I provided the financial security and direction. He provided companionship, emotional support, or so I believed, and managed the home front. But slowly, subtly, the gap between us widened. Not just the age gap, which felt increasingly significant, but a gap in ambition, in perspective. My career demanded more. I embraced new challenges, always planning for the future. Jake seemed content with his routine, his social life, less interested in the kind of forward momentum that defined my world. Conversations became stagnant. His dreams seemed to involve more leisure than labor. The intellectual connection, the shared vision of a life built together towards common goals, began to fray. Over the past 2 years, the love I felt shifted. The vibrant spark faded into a comfortable, then eventually, a distant companionship. I realized I was living with someone I cared for deeply as a person, but no longer saw as a life partner. The intimacy dwindled, replaced by a polite, almost roommate-like existence. I tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm. We went to couples therapy. It was frustrating. I spoke of needing a partner with shared goals, of feeling like I was carrying the weight of 2 futures. Jake spoke of feeling pressured by my success, of just wanting a simpler life, of feeling like he was constantly compared to my ambitious world. We were on fundamentally different wavelengths. The therapy didn't help us connect. It highlighted how far apart we had drifted. Staying felt dishonest, a disservice to both of us. I deserved a partner who aligned with my path, and Jake deserved someone who didn't make him feel inadequate for wanting something different. The painful, inevitable conclusion settled in. I needed to end the marriage. Telling him was agonizing. I chose a quiet Sunday morning. I was gentle, respectful, taking full responsibility for my feelings changing, for the realization that our paths had diverged. I emphasized it wasn't about blame, but about fundamental incompatibility that had become insurmountable. His reaction was a gut punch. Initial shock gave way to confusion, then hurt, and finally, a chilling anger that transformed. His familiar face. "You want to end this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "After everything? After my 20s? You just decided I'm not part of the plan anymore?" I tried to interject, to explain it wasn't that simple, but he wasn't listening. "You used me," he accused. Standing up, his hands clenched. "You took the best years of my life, my prime. While I was here, being the supportive husband, managing things at home, not focusing solely on my career like my friends were, you were building your empire. And now, you're just going to walk away and leave me with nothing," the phrase echoed, eerily, a dark mirror of a narrative I had heard before, but never expected to be aimed at me, the woman who had brought the financial security into the relationship. "Jake, that's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I never stopped. "You from pursuing anything, I supported you." "Supported me? By letting me live off your success while I stalled my own growth?" He scoffed, a bitter sound. "You wasted my time. You used up my good years only to leave me behind." Then came the demand, cold and hard. "If you want out, fine. But you owe me for this. For the years you took. I want half of everything. The house, your retirement, your investments, everything you earned while I was being your husband." I stared at him, the breath catching in my throat. "Jake, we have a prenup. It's very clear." His eyes blazed. "That piece of paper? That was when I was 21. I didn't know anything. You were older, more experienced. You pressured me. That prenup isn't valid now. You emotionally manipulated me. You used your position to lock me into a marriage where I sacrificed my potential, and that prenup shouldn't matter because you morally defrauded me out of my prime years." His words hit me like a physical blow. Emotional manipulation? Pressure? That wasn't how I remembered it. He had his own lawyer. He had seemed eager to marry me, prenup notwithstanding. The demand for half of my considerable assets that were largely premarital or earned independently as per the agreement, was outrageous. We were talking about a potential demand for over $1 million of my wealth. I sought counsel immediately. Ms. Davies was everything I needed. Sharp, empathetic, and utterly confident in the strength of my prenuptial agreement. I sat in her elegant office, recounting Jake's accusations and demands, feeling a mix of hurt and righteous indignation. "Olivia," Ms. Davies said, after reviewing the document, "this is a robust prenuptial agreement. It clearly defines separate property and how assets acquired during the marriage will be treated. Jake had independent counsel, barring any extraordinary circumstances, like proven fraud or duress, which is extremely difficult to demonstrate years. After signing, this agreement will be upheld by the court. But he's saying I wasted his youth, that I owe him for it," I said, the unfairness of it stinging. "That is an emotional plea, Olivia, not a legal argument that supersedes a valid contract," she stated firmly. "While the court can consider contributions to the marriage, both financial and non-financial, a prenup like this specifically limits claims on separate property. His feeling that his youth was wasted is not a legal basis for him to claim half of your premarital assets, or assets acquired with your protected income. Legally, I was secure. Emotionally, I felt under siege. The man I had loved and supported was attempting to redefine our shared history as a calculated plot to exploit him and then discard him. This wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting the narrative to make me the villain and justify his demands. This was his version of revenge. The divorce proceedings escalated quickly. Jake hired Mr. Harrison again, who proved to be an aggressive advocate for his client's victim narrative. Their initial filing was astonishing, demanding a substantial portion of my separate assets, significant spousal support, and painting a picture of Jake as a man who had sacrificed his career potential to support my rise, only to be cruelly abandoned. They completely disregarded the prenup in their demands, acting as if it didn't exist. Every legal communication felt like an extension of Jake's accusations. They alleged I had hidden assets. False. They claimed the prenup was signed under duress due to our age gap and my financial power. Insulting and false. They even tried to quantify his contributions in abstract terms, arguing that his presence and support during my demanding career years were invaluable and warranted compensation from my assets. It was clear their strategy was to ignore my contract, rely on an emotional argument, and make the process so costly and stressful for me that I would settle just to escape the nightmare. The emotional toll was immense. Our once shared home became a place of tension until I moved out. The life we built was dissolving into animosity, and the personal attacks didn't stay confined to legal documents. Jake took his narrative public. He started subtly at first, airing grievances to mutual friends, emphasizing how unfairly he was being treated after dedicating his 20s to our marriage. Then he escalated. He started posting on social media, mournful, veiled posts about being discarded after investing years in a relationship, about the cruelty of someone prioritizing money over people. He didn't name me directly, but it was clear to anyone who knew us. He cultivated an image of a young man whose prime years were stolen by a wealthier, older woman who no longer wanted him. It worked. Some friends were sympathetic to him, buying into his story of victimhood. It hurt to see people I cared about being swayed by his distorted reality. His legal team pushed the narrative of his financial need aggressively. They argued that while I had built significant wealth during the marriage, Jake had not, due to his focus on the relationship and supporting my career. They inflated the value of his non-monetary contributions, trying to make them sound equivalent to years of high-level income generation. They claimed he was at a significant disadvantage entering the job market in his late 20s, compared to peers who had been solely career-focused. It was a calculated move to justify his demand for a piece of my success, framing it not as greed, but as compensation for perceived lost opportunity caused by me. Mr. Harrison, relentless, challenged the prenup's validity. Every minor detail from the signing process 6 years ago was scrutinized. They demanded every email, every conversation record leading up to the signing, hoping to find anything that could be twisted into evidence of duress or incomplete disclosure. They argued that circumstances had changed so significantly since he signed at 21, primarily my increased wealth versus his more modest growth, that enforcing the prenup now would be unconscionable. It was pure legal harassment, designed to bleed my resources and my resolve. My stress was through the roof. My career, something I had always excelled at, felt like a distraction from the all-consuming legal battle. Ms. Davies was my anchor. "This is exactly why you have the prenup, Olivia," she would remind me patiently. "It anticipates these situations. His claims are emotionally charged, but legally weak against a valid contract. We will systematically refute every point." She advised me to stay off social media, to document everything Jake posted or communicated, and to trust the legal process. It was difficult to watch him paint me as a villain, while feeling like I was simply trying to move on with my life, while upholding a clear agreement. Mediation was tense, a stark display of the chasm between our positions. Jake and Mr. Harrison leaned heavily on the emotional appeals, the narrative of his sacrificed youth and financial disparity. Mr. Harrison spoke passionately about the unfairness of leaving a man in his late 20s with minimal assets after dedicating his early 20s to the marriage of a wealthier woman. Ms. Davies calmly and repeatedly brought it back to the signed contract, outlining what the prenup allowed, essentially Jake's minimal separate property and a small division of genuinely joint funds, and what it didn't, a claim on my substantial separate assets. "Mr. Harrison," Ms. Davies stated, her voice firm but polite, "while we empathize with Mr. Miller's feelings, the prenuptial agreement is a legally binding contract that specifically addresses the division of assets. It was entered into willingly, with independent legal counsel. His current emotional state or perception of past sacrifice, while valid feelings, do not legally invalidate this agreement." Jake, emboldened by his lawyer, interjected directly at one point, "But she did take my best years. I put my life on hold for us. She owes me for that." The mediator tried to redirect him, but his focus remained on the perceived injustice of his wasted youth, compared to my continued success. Mediation failed spectacularly. We were heading for court. Jake's side seemed confident they could sway a judge with their emotional arguments, perhaps hoping for a sympathy ruling despite the law. As the court date approached, Mr. Harrison's tactics grew more desperate. He filed more motions, demanded more irrelevant documentation, trying to overwhelm us. But as Jake pushed harder for his revenge, using the legal system to try and extract a massive settlement from me, his aggressive strategy began to yield unexpected results, but not in his favor. The concept of karma, cold and impersonal, began to manifest not as cosmic retribution, but as the consequence of his own overreach within the structured confines of the law. Ms. Davies, anticipating Mr. Harrison's aggressive challenges and claims of Jake's financial hardship and sacrificed career, initiated a comprehensive financial discovery process on Jake. His claims of being left with nothing and his arguments about sacrificed potential prompted a deeper look into his finances and activities during the marriage. The discovery yielded information that directly contradicted his narrative. While he had contributed his salary to the joint account, records showed a pattern of spending that often left him with minimal personal savings. More significantly, buried in his financial statements and some retrieved emails were records and communications related to several online ventures and cryptocurrency investments he had pursued over the last couple of years. These weren't major successes, but they showed he wasn't solely focused on supporting the marriage to the exclusion of personal financial pursuits. He had been actively trying to build his own wealth, just not very successfully, and had kept these efforts largely separate from our joint financial discussions. Even more impactful were emails found from roughly 2 years prior, around the time our marriage started to truly falter and therapy began. These emails were between Jake and a former college advisor, discussing options for him to go back to school for an advanced degree or pursue specific certifications that could have significantly boosted his career prospects. The emails showed he had explored these paths, but ultimately chose not to pursue them, citing a desire for less stress and more free time, rather than any pressure from me to prioritize the marriage over his career development. This directly undermined his argument that I had somehow caused him to sacrifice his potential during his prime years. This evidence was devastating to his case. It didn't change the fact that my assets were separate, but it demolished his claim that I was morally responsible for his current financial situation or lack of career advancement. It showed he had opportunities he chose not to pursue, and that he was actively, albeit privately, engaged in personal financial ventures. The court hearing was remarkably swift, precisely because of the strength of the prenup and the evidence from discovery. Mr. Harrison again led with the emotional arguments, painting the picture of the wasted youth and the unfairness of the age-wealth disparity. He attempted to minimize the prenup's validity. Ms. Davies was precise and clinical. She presented the signed prenuptial agreement, highlighting the clauses protecting my separate property and the clear terms regarding asset division. She presented the evidence of Jake's independent legal counsel at the time of signing, demonstrating it wasn't signed under duress. Then, she methodically introduced the evidence from discovery, the records of his personal financial ventures, and the emails showing he had chosen not to pursue further education or career advancement opportunities, directly countering his claims of sacrificed potential due to the marriage. The judge listened intently. When Ms. Davies finished, his tone was decisive. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said, addressing Jake's lawyer, "the court has reviewed the prenuptial agreement and finds it to be a valid and enforceable contract. It was signed by both parties with independent legal representation and appears to meet all legal requirements." He continued, his gaze briefly flicking towards Jake. "While the court acknowledges the emotional difficulties of divorce, Mr. Miller's arguments regarding wasted youth or sacrificed potential are not legal grounds to invalidate a prenuptial agreement that clearly delineates separate property and asset division. Furthermore, the evidence presented during discovery appears to contradict the narrative that Mr. Miller's career path was solely inhibited by the marriage. It suggests personal choices regarding pursuit of further education and independent financial activities." The judge upheld the prenup in its entirety. Jake was entitled only to his own minimal separate property and a fair division of the truly joint funds, which amounted to very little compared to his demands. He received none of my premarital assets, none of my retirement, and none of the significant investments I had made with my income. Then came the final sting of karma for Jake's aggressive, unfounded legal strategy. The judge, citing the frivolous nature of many of the challenges to the valid prenup and the demands that ignored its clear terms, ordered Jake to pay a portion of my legal fees. It wasn't the full amount, but it was a significant sum, adding financial consequence to his failed attempt to break the prenup and claim my wealth based on emotional and misleading arguments. His face, as the judge delivered the final ruling, was a mask of shock and devastation. The fury was still there, but now underscored by the stark reality of his defeat. His attempt at financial revenge had not only failed, it had cost him. The divorce was finalized, adhering strictly to the judge's orders. My financial security remained intact, protected by the agreement I had wisely put in place. Jake received only what the prenup and the law said he was entitled to, a fraction of what he had demanded. The aftermath was quieter, but not without its own pain. The emotional scars of his betrayal and the bitter legal fight remained. The public narrative he had attempted to craft also seemed to lose steam. When the legal outcome and the discovery evidence became known through the inevitable channels of gossip, some people saw through his wasted youth story. The social karma was there. His attempts to gain sympathy by painting me as heartless ultimately backfired when the facts revealed his own actions and choices. I don't dwell on Jake. He moved out, presumably to figure out his next steps, now, burdened by legal fees and the failure of his attempt to leverage my assets. I hope, for his sake, he learns from this, that attempting to seek revenge or make someone else responsible for your choices is a path that ultimately harms you most. Reflect on it all sometimes. The love was real, for a time. The divergence of our paths was sad, a quiet heartbreak. But his reaction, the claims of wasted youth, the aggressive demands for my hard-earned wealth, the attempts to smear my name, that was a conscious choice. A decision to prioritize resentment and perceived entitlement over the agreement we made. My decision to leave was difficult, but necessary. My decision to stand by the prenup wasn't about being cruel. It was about honoring a contract and protecting my financial independence from demands that felt punitive and unfair. His attempts at revenge, built on a foundation of distorted claims, crumbled under the weight of legal fact and his own revealed choices. That wasn't my doing. That was the consequence of his actions, a form of karma delivered by the impartial hand of the law. I'm moving forward, rebuilding my peace, perhaps a little more cautious, but firm in the knowledge that I navigated the end of my marriage with integrity, despite the storm he tried to create.